King of heaven, my treasure thou art. My King of heaven, my victory won. May we reach heaven's joys, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of our own, heart whatever before, still be our vision, O ruler of all. Still be our vision, O ruler of all.
Reading from 1 Kings 19. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in a mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall appoint Hazael king over Aram. You shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel-Manoah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill. And whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him."
Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Born to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love.
From Matthew 14. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up in the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why do you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
Lost and weary traveler, searching for the way to go. Stranger, heavy-hearted, longing for someone to know. May you find a light. May you find a light. May you find a light to guide you home. Lost and weary traveler, searching for the way to go. Stranger, heavy-hearted, longing for someone to know. May you find a light. May you find a light. May you find a light to guide you home. Well, there are weary travelers searching everywhere you go. Strangers who are searching, longing deeply to be known. May you find a light. May you find a light. May you find a light to guide you home. guide you home.
Good morning. If you are a member, don't forget to stick around for the business meeting afterwards. If you're not, you can feel free to stick around and see how it goes as well. All right. This past week, I had the honor of attending a Hope Clergy Caucus. It's a really great time. There's 5 a year. And basically, it's a time when pastors or leaders of congregations who are members of Hope get together, share a meal, get updates on the issue work of Hope, talk about and explore ways of encouraging our congregations in the work of deeper involvement with justice. And we also do a text study. It rotates around who wants to offer that reflection. I say it rotates. There's only a few of us who seem to do it, so I don't know. Maybe not everybody wants to. But this time it was Pastor Gabriel Morgan from St. Paul Lutheran. Many of you know him. And in referencing a chapter of Matthew that we'll see coming up in a few weeks, and then also tying that to some of the work of Martin Luther King Jr., Pastor Gabriel gave this call to consider the way in which suffering can be redemptive. And he, of course, gave the caveat that when we look at the cross, we see an example of resistance to evil, right? And so our idea of redemptive suffering must not include a kind of passivity towards evil, right? It's often used as a way to keep victims within their victimhood, and that's obviously terrible. We don't justify cases of abuse, manipulation, enslavement of one human being over underneath another, right? These are not places of mercy or grace. Any mercy or grace that emerges in those situations is, of course, in the resistance to that evil, whether by the person undergoing that suffering or from someone from the outside who is there to bring deliverance or rescue. But even with that caveat in place, it's still a difficult thing for us to hear, right? We opened it up to a time of reflection, and one of the other pastors said, well, the first thing is, I want to run as far away from this as possible, right? If we're honest with ourselves, we don't want to bear the cross. We don't want to lay down our lives. We don't want to suffer. It does not sound in any way appealing. The path that Jesus laid before his disciples was a difficult one for them to bear in their time, and it is still a difficult one for us to hear in our time. It's really interesting if you read portions of MLK's autobiographical accounts, because once Pastor Gabriel read this extended quote, I kind of jumped into reading some of MLK myself because I was very interested. You see this idea emerge. He speaks of the growth of his own faith at the same time as he speaks of the growth of the idea of nonviolence. And he says that nonviolence really only works if you have some kind of hope that there is something guiding the universe towards justice. If there is some kind of benevolence. Of course, he considers this to be God. This is also a position that he didn't come to necessarily rationally. Right? He talks about all his time in seminary and all of the different philosophies and theologies that he studied and was around and professors he sat under. But what he realizes is that he comes to believe in what he believes in, not just through his study, but through entering these moments of crises and watching faith emerge from within him. And then in being faithful to the hope that he found, right, entering again into more moments of crises. And the faith is then strengthened again, and he talked about that concept in his life's work. Our text for today demonstrates to us this kind of movement of faith in the characters of our stories. So we're going to begin with the life of Joseph, move to this moment of weakness and despair in the life of Elijah, and then we'll see a couple things emerge from those stories that we will then tie and work together as we see them fleshed out in this beautiful way from our text in Matthew. As we see the interaction between Peter and Jesus and how it is that this posture of faith, what it really looks like, and what we can honestly expect from our faithful actions. Joseph is a pretty recognizable character in the Old Testament, right? Has anyone in here not heard of Joseph? Okay, yeah. And yet he's only mentioned in this one story, right? His name's mentioned like 2 or 3 other times. But it's not really a prominent character. And yet we all know him, right? There's this cultural imagination in the Judeo-Christian world that gives us plenty of opportunities to know who Joseph was. We have Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. We have the DreamWorks movie, Prince of Egypt, right? For some reason, Joseph has captured the imagination of people. If you were close to my family growing up, you may have, none of you, I don't know why I even said that. We had this rainbow-colored like robe that my grandmother made when she was using it as a Sunday school lesson for her church in Michigan. And it was supposed to be Joseph's many-colored coat, right? And it was literally just like stripes of it was a rainbow, but like in stripes. Yeah. Well, for our church's fall festival, because Halloween was bad, right, was Joseph like 3 straight years because I wore this ridiculous cloak, robe thing, you know. I think she got like whatever. What's that? Joann's. She must have just gone and got this. It was really flimsy, really thin. There was nothing like good about this, right? But there's plenty of pictures of me in it, and Caleb also, if you ever see him. I think that's where he got his Prince Joseph moniker from, actually. So, yeah, I don't know why I'm telling you all of that. The point is, we all know about Joseph and his cloak and this cloak given from Jacob, his father. Israel, who we saw last week wrestling with God, now they're settled down. They have this farmland, and they're this kind of shepherding nomadic tribe, right? And Joseph is part of those responsible to take care of the sheep and to pasture them. And he's the youngest of the brothers, and he had these dreams that they didn't like to hear. They thought he was some uppity young buck who didn't know his place. It doesn't help that the text says Jacob loved him the most out of all the other brothers and gave him this special cloak. What's interesting about this cloak, mildly interesting, is that there's really nothing about a lot of colors mentioned in it. So I wore that ridiculous thing all those years for no reason. It just means it was really well made, right? You heard the NRSV says ornate. Another translation is a cloak with sleeves. It's a lot less interesting than Technicolor, isn't it? The idea is that Jacob spent time on it. It was well made. It wasn't just some kind of wrap, right? It was something nice. And Joseph's cloak is an interesting thing to follow in his life. It provides us with some benchmarks. His clothing is mentioned all throughout the rest of his story. And it marks for us the sense of his own faith growing as he is relating to the suffering that he undergoes along the way, transmuting it into something that benefits not only himself, but his entire society. His jealous brothers strip him of the cloak that his father made. They sell him into slavery. They give the cloak back to Jacob covered in blood, and they say, "A wolf ate him. We're sorry, Jacob." And he's distraught. And now Joseph is in Egypt, and he works with the household, this powerful regent, Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife seeks to seduce Joseph, and as she grabs the cloak he's wearing at the time, he slips out of it and runs away. She's upset and has him thrown in prison, where he is now wearing nothing but just rags. But upon becoming known as someone who could deliver these special oracles and interpret people's dreams, he's given new clothes, and he's brought before Pharaoh. When he interprets the dreams of the Pharaoh, he is given this place of second in command over all of Egypt because of his wisdom, how to address this oncoming famine. And at that point, it is said in the text, he is given the nicest clothes that he has ever worn. The story traces these clothes for us, and all along the way, Joseph, through cunning, through wisdom, through being the kind of person who will not ultimately be taken advantage of, does not rail or fight back against the suffering he's been subjected to, but rather he embraces the tension in each moment and seeks the good of the people around him. When he is in prison with the other attendants to Pharaoh, who have been in prison for whatever Pharaoh's put people in prison for, he cares for them. He does have to deliver bad news to one of them, but he wants to give them the sense of comfort that comes with knowing what their dreams mean. And of course, at the end of the story, when he finally meets his brothers, who years ago sold him into slavery, he says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, so that many people could be saved from starving." Because Joseph is able to collectivize and centralize Egypt's farming, he ensures there is enough food, not only for Egypt, but the surrounding regions as well. And so we see in Joseph, in the unfolding of his life, this display of faith that MLK speaks of. Right? We can think of it in this way. Joseph must have in some way thought that the God he knew, the God he had been taught of by his father Jacob, probably sitting on Jacob's knee, hearing the story that we heard last week of Peniel, where Jacob wrestled with God, Jacob struggled with God. Joseph takes that story with him. It's part of who he is. He finds himself in situations and he doesn't say, and he knows this doesn't mean that God is against him. Maybe this is something he's supposed to wrestle with God about. Maybe it's something that God and he are wrestling with together against others as a team, right? Whatever it is, this sense of struggle is present in Joseph, and he doesn't walk away from it. He embraces it for the good of the people around him and himself. Our next story is Elijah on the mountainside. And we've talked about this story in the past, and we've looked at the kinds of theologies that can emerge from us from this text, but today we're going to look at it from a different angle. Elijah is tired. He's worn out. He feels like he's alone. There are people who want to kill him. And so he goes and he sees God on Mount Horeb, which is where, if we remember, Moses saw the burning bush and is given the commission to confront Pharaoh, to demand the release of the Hebrew slaves. And when he reaches a place near the mountain, he hears a voice that says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he says, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." I wanted to read that answer again, even though you just heard it read. And then he experiences mighty rushing wind that shakes the mountainside, and then an earthquake that threatens to have the mountain crumble on him, and then a great burning fire, these engulfing flames. But one after the other, it is said that God is not in any of those. God was not in the flashy responses to Elijah's answer of self-pity. God was in the no answer, in the sound of sheer silence. And after Elijah hears this sound of sheer silence, the voice asks him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Like, I just answered that with this long answer of all the things that I have that I consider wrong in my life. And then the text includes, right, you just heard it, that Elijah answers the exact same thing again, word for word. I think it serves to maybe highlight the melodrama of all of this. I'm the only one left. They're seeking my life. They've killed all your prophets. Interestingly, the message from God is, go, do another task. And the task is to sow chaos. Isn't that weird? God doesn't say, it's going to be okay, Elijah. It's going to be okay. I'm here with you now. You can have comfort in my presence. Right? Isn't that what we would want to hear if we were in Elijah's place? What are you doing here, Elijah? I have all these things, God, that are happening around me. I just need some rest. Okay, you can have your rest. No, he doesn't say that. That's not how it works. What we begin to see with Elijah is that's never how God's presence and sustaining comfort work. That's what MLK found out. That's what Joseph found out. Now it's what Elijah's finding out, right? Elijah goes with his concerns and his complaints and his fears, his insecurities. He lays them before the Lord. He gets these big answers that aren't really answers. And then the only answer he does get is, okay, we need a new king in Aram. We need a new king in Israel, and you're going to anoint another prophet to help you. And these new two kings that you anoint over these two kingdoms are going to fight each other. And they're all just going to wipe each other out. And whoever they don't get, Elisha's just going to clean up the rest. There's this weird triangulation of violence in order to deal with the injustice that has been enacted over the people by the worshipers of Baal. The only thing that Elijah has to do here, the only thing is keep going. Continue on. And ensure that that tension remains. I don't know how far to push that, right? I don't want to lean too heavily on this interpretation. But it is definitely worth noting for our own faith journey this morning through these characters that the presence of God is not found in the resolution of anything, but rather it is found along the way as that which strengthens us in the struggle. Our final story follows on the heels of the story we referenced last week from the Gospel of Matthew, the feeding of the 5,000. And as you heard from the reading, Matthew tells his followers, right, to go and get in a boat. As soon as he sends the people away that they have fed, he says, go on a boat, I'm going to finish praying. Remember, he was interrupted with the feeding. So he goes back and he's going to finish his time alone on the mountain. And the disciples are sailing on the sea when they come into this really, really bad weather, threatening to undo their lives. The boat is being battered by the waves and the wind. Then they see Jesus out in the water and they think he's some kind of apparition, a ghost, a spirit. But Jesus says, no, hey guys, it's me. We have this idea before us of the chaotic waters seeking to undo life. That's a concept that's not unknown, of course, to the people hearing Matthew's text. It's not unknown to the whole history of our Old Testament. It's not unknown even to the books of the New Testament, where we see in the book of Revelation the Roman Empire described as a dragon rising from the sea. The waters are these forces, these chaotic forces threatening to swallow us all up. And here they're threatening to swallow up the disciples. And we see Jesus. Just like the Spirit of God in the creation account, just like the Spirit of God in the flood account, hovering over the waters, ready to create. Or maybe he's not hovering. Maybe with each step, he's doing battle and winning over the chaos. Maybe with each step, bringing dry land up, right? Like in Genesis. Matthew leaves it to our imaginations, and so doing makes his point very clear. This is divine creative action at play. Now, so far, that could read like any other story. A God person having control over the primordial chaos. It's a story much older than even the Bible. But this is where the second half of our text comes into play, right? And where it fits within what we've seen so far from our other two stories. Because as we so often see with the divinity of Jesus, it is an invitation into that life for us. As you heard, Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's not a ghost, it's me. And then Peter says, if it really is you, I want to come out there with you. What does Peter have in mind here? Peter is now in a place where our other characters found themselves, where we find ourselves, at a point of the inbreaking of that which is chaotic, at a crisis kind of moment, at a tumultuous moment of turmoil. So much of our lives is spent working to overcome these moments, to bring them back into control. We are afraid that chaos will undo us, so we seek to subdue it. But the fact is that we're never quite successful at that, are we? The firmament breaks and rains always begin to fall. And now Peter stands, having had his security stripped away. The boat is overwhelmed. They can't steer it. The wind is against him. What are they going to do? Well, what do we do in a moment of crisis? Moments where we stand exposed, where our illusions of being in control are shattered. There are two basic responses. Be undone and face the chaos, or retreat and try to remain in control, frantically scooping up the broken pieces of our shattered world like a child who frantically glues together a vase that they broke only to find out the finished product is much worse than having just admitted they broke the vase. This avoidance, this retreat from crisis can look vastly different from one person to another, of course. We can despair like Elijah did. We can take an attitude which at first glance looks like submission. Despair has a sense of raw honesty about the broken nature of things, right? Despair doesn't sugarcoat. Despair appears to be brutally honest. But at the end of it, despair is still a retreat from chaos or crisis, because despair is closed off to the future. Rather than letting be what will be and traversing the moments of crisis, despair assumes that it knows the future and that it will be bad. This is evidence despair signals within us the will to control, that we have not opened ourselves up in faith. On the flip side, we can see something that appears to be different, right? Optimism. There is a kind of false hope that imagines that it also knows what the future will hold. But as the Apostle Paul says in the book of Romans, hope that is seen is not hope. True hope is allowing, again, the future to be a future, not collapsing it into the present by imagining that we can control it. These two sides of the same coin of false optimism and despair are really just ways of rejecting our stand honestly before the storm while seeking to control the outcome. Once Peter hears that this water walker claims to be Jesus, he says, "Let me come out to you." And Jesus says, "Okay, come on." And so he steps out of the boat. He's leaving the safety of what he knows. He fishes for a living. He's no stranger to storms or boats or lakes or winds or waves, right? He had been trying to weather the storm the way he knows how, invoking the control he has, but now he senses that he should relinquish it. And so he does something that from the outside sounds like insanity. He gets out of the boat in the raging storm. And then he looks around and he sees the waves and he hears the winds and he sinks. Jesus gets him up out of the water and they all get into the boat. And then Jesus says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now what's interesting is we aren't given any detail about what it is that Peter was supposedly doubting. Why did he doubt that he could walk on the water? Doubt that Jesus would let him sink? Doubt that it was Jesus even out there? Mark's account and John's account don't even include Peter getting out of the boat. So why does Matthew have this scene? Many commentators agree that this story is meant to represent the community Matthew's writing to. They're in the boat of this new fledgling community. They're being persecuted. The world is against them. The waves and winds of chaos are beating around them, just like Joseph and Elijah. But Jesus is with them in the storm. But if that's the case, then to include this bit about Peter is an interesting addition then, right? Because it's an invitation for the readers to get out of the boat. We often hear this story framed in a way that when Jesus tells Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" He's implying that had Peter had faith, he could have continued walking on the water. He wouldn't have sunk. But I don't know if that's the point. There's nothing textually that demands us to think that. When I hear Jesus ask, "Why did you doubt?" I hear, "Why did you doubt that the storm would continue. O you of little faith, you thought that walking into the chaos would make it go away? Faith is not expecting Jesus to just make everything better. Remember, that's just a way of striving to exercise control. Faith is remaining open to any possibility and stepping out anyway. What demonstrates Peter's lack of faith is not that he sank, but rather that he imagined he wouldn't sink. If it's really you, he tells Jesus, if it's really you, oh, it's really me, Peter, but you need to learn that this is where I'm always going to be found, in storms. I love the fact that Peter sinks. I love the fact that he is brought back out of the water and put into the boat. I don't think it's an accident that Matthew uses such explicit imagery of going into the water and coming back up. Is not our ritual of baptism a reenactment of the embrace of the salvific moment of crisis? We are undone. We die, overcome by the chaos of the waters and raised to a whole new way of being. Is a fundamental shift, but it is only through faith that this shift occurs. Letting be what is as moments of crises arise and listening for moments of divine movement there. Maybe silent, like with Elijah. Maybe absent, as with Joseph. Many commentators have noted that as you read the story of Joseph, it's by far the longest period in the book of Genesis where God is not mentioned. God does not speak to Joseph in the way he speaks to the other patriarchs. There is no sense that God is directing Joseph's life along the way. Joseph is listening to the truths of the moments of struggle and conflict and responding to them in kind. And at the end of it, he says, God was doing that. But there's nothing in the text that tells us he knew that along the way. And so it is with us, listening to the truths of the moments of our struggle and conflict, finding out what they tell us about ourselves, responding in kind. Those are our moments of salvation. And of course, this is the only way to be able to be like Jesus, who roams around in the chaos, inviting others to come and lifting them up when they drown. This was the encouragement and call to Matthew's community. This is the encouragement and call to ours. The call to consider what is our place in relationship to the boat and the storm. Where is it that we have taken the safety and comfort of the boat to mean that we don't have to deal with the storm? Maybe if you're honest with yourself, you find yourself in the position of relying on the things that are said here on Sundays to shield you from doing the very things that are said here on Sundays. Right? Like Peter, you may come here to find a Jesus who will let you hop into the waves as if it's a stroll through the park, rather than coming to meet a Jesus who will show you what waves and wind really are. Or perhaps, if you're honest with yourselves, you feel good about being a part of a community where we preach of a world of justice to come. You may agree with the sermons. You may think, yeah, our church is way cooler than those other ones. But if you examine your actions, you're not actually pursuing that which makes for justice. It's easy, like Peter did, to outsource our faith, so to speak. Just as Peter imagined that Jesus would take care of it rather than following after Jesus, we imagine that the existence of the church is already enough for us. That churchy things just kind of magically happen. But that's not how it is, right? That's not what we see in Jesus and in Peter. The boat is great. We all ride in it together. It keeps us safe, yes. But faith demands that we actually get out and go into the chaos. Faith is not an assurance of safety, of things going the way that we imagine that they should. Faith compels us into the unknown. It always does. Let Joseph, Elijah, Peter stand as our examples. Faith is a posture of hopeful openness to the future, regardless of our surroundings. And it grows more fully within us in the struggles of life. Let today and all Sunday mornings be your time in the boat, but then go out into the messiness and uncertainty and despair and evil around you. You will be changed. And then you can be the hand of comfort for others as they undergo that change as well. This is our calling together. Let's pray. God, we ask that you lead us That's it. We ask that you lead us. That's going to be into all kinds of places and all kinds of settings. And it may not be clear that you are with us in those moments. It may not be clear that we are being guided by you, but our hope and our faith undergird us. And we know that that which we are given, if we are faithful, will lead us into your kingdom. It is in Jesus' name we ask this. Amen. On the night that Jesus was to be handed over, he took bread and he broke it, and he blessed it, and he gave thanks for it. And he said, "This bread is my body, broken for you." In the same way, he took wine and he poured it, blessed it, and gave thanks for it. And he said, "This wine that we share, which is so often a sign of joy and mirth, right? Of friendship and excitement and laughter, it's my blood, poured out at the hands of those who seek our destruction." But just like all the examples we've been given, Jesus says that suffering is not the end of me, and it does not have to be the end of you. But rather it is the kind of suffering that is done in resistance to oppression, to evil. It is done in resistance to sin, and so undoes it. And so Jesus says, this is done for the remission of sins. We, along with millions of Christians over thousands of years, partake in this same act together so that we may testify to the life of Jesus within our own, that we may, again, commit to be the body of Christ in the world, and so that faith may grow within us, that we may do so effectively and lovingly. May grace fill you this morning as we partake.